Mother West Wind came down from the purple hills in the golden light of the early morning. Over her shoulders was slung a bag, a great big bag, and inside the bag were all of Mother West Wind's children, the merry little breezes. She reached the meadow and let the breezes tumble out. "I have a story for you," she said. It is called When Mr. Gopher Got Pockets. When Peter Rabbit would leave the dear old briar patch, he seldom went far without coming to a little pile of fresh earth. These little piles of earth had puzzled Peter a great deal for a long time. It sometimes seemed to Peter as if they appeared by magic. He would pass across a certain part of the green meadows, and there would be nothing but the green things growing there. When he returned, there would be one or two, or maybe half a dozen piles of newly turned earth. "Of course," said Peter the first time he noticed one of these little earth piles. "Where there is a pile of earth like that, there must be a hole. Someone has been digging, and this is the dirt thrown out." But when Peter looked for the hole, he couldn't find one. There was no hole. It was very puzzling. He kicked that pile of earth until he scattered it far and wide, but there was no sign of a hole. It looked like as if someone had brought those little piles, dropped them on the green meadow, and then went away. Of course no one did anything of the kind, and Peter knew it. He spent a good deal of time wondering who could make them. And then one day, as he was hopping across the green meadow, the ground right in front of him began to move. It startled Peter. He decided that it would be foolish to run, so he sat perfectly still and watched that spot where the ground was moving. Earth, loose earth, was pushed up from underneath. And as Peter sat there staring, with eyes popping out, the pile grew and grew. Suddenly, a head was thrust out of the middle of it, a homely head. In an instant it vanished, and a second later, the hole where it had been was filled. Peter could hear the stranger packing the earth in from underneath. When he looked again, there was no sign of that hole. No one would have ever guessed that there had been one there before. This was Peter's first time meeting Grubby Gopher. Peter would have thought Grubby Gopher was the most uninteresting fellow he ever did meet. But then Peter noticed that Grubby had the biggest pockets in his cheeks. He was curious about those pockets, so he asked Jimmy Skunk, "Why does Grubby Gopher have pockets in his cheeks?" And Jimmy replied, "Because they are handier there than they would be anywhere else." Jimmy asked, "Have you seen any fat beetles this morning, Peter?" "No," returned Peter shortly, and then an idea came to him. "I'll tell you what, Jimmy, if you tell me about those pockets, I'll help you hunt for some beetles. Is that a bargain?" Jimmy said, "Sure, I'll tell you about the days when the world was young. All good stories seem to have had their beginnings then, so far as I can see. Grubby got those pockets from his father, and his father got them from his father, and so on and on back to the first gopher." Grand old Mr. Gopher was making his way in the world. He discovered everyone else was doing the same. He discovered that if everyone tried to eat the same, there wouldn't be enough to go around. Not long after that, he discovered his neighbors began to look at him in a way that made him uncomfortable. They would have a hungry gleam in their eyes and lick their lips. He decided the less he was seen by these neighbors, the better. Another thing Mr. Gopher discovered was that each one of the animals around him seemed to have some kind of special gift. Being a good climber, or a swift runner, or a great swimmer, or a wonderful jumper. He couldn't climb, run, jump, or swim particularly well. What could he do? What was his special advantage? What could it be? He sat down and studied himself. Then he noticed for the first time that his hands were different from the hands of those around him. For his size, they were large and strong, and in the middle 3 fingers were long, stout claws. What could he do with these? Dig! That's it, he could dig! He realized he could dig at a surprising rate. Then came a new idea. He would dig himself a hole and live in it. That would keep him out of sight of his big hungry neighbors. So he dug himself a hole, but then he discovered that in order to get food, he must leave the hole. So then he was no better off than before. He started digging some more and more just for fun. Then he came to a root in his path. He decided to cut it and get it out of its way. When he began to cut it, he made another discovery. That root was good to eat. He ate all of it and then he went on digging, hoping to find more. He realized he could live underground and be safe. He would make himself a comfortable home and he would tunnel wherever he pleased to find food. Soon he heard Mr. Squirrel talking about the coming of Jack Frost. Winter was coming and Mr. Squirrel was planning to store up a lot of food in a storehouse. That's a good idea of Mr. Squirrel's, thought Mr. Gopher. I believe I'll do the same thing. But when he tried it, he found it was very slow and hard work. He could only carry so little at a time and he had to carry it far. One day, Mother Nature appeared in front of him and smilingly asked what she could grant him. Almost without thinking, he replied, "Pockets, big pockets in my cheeks." He explained to Mother Nature how he had learned to live underground and how lately he had been trying to lay up a store of food, but had found it slow work. Mother Nature was pleased to think that Mr. Gopher had made the most of his opportunities, but she didn't say so. "I'll think it over," said she, and left him. But the very next time Mr. Gopher brushed a hand against one of his cheeks, he discovered a great pocket there. He was so excited and grateful. Peter Rabbit was grateful to Jimmy Skunk for explaining about the pockets. "Come on, Jimmy, let's go find you some beetles."